flu, but hepatitis holds up the sentencing of Funzi Tieri on charges of racketeering. It is not Tieri who is ill, but his lawyer. Milt Lewis has that story.
James Jimmy the Weasel Fradiano is riding high these days and likely to make a bundle from a book published on the eve of the sentencing of Frank Funzi Tieri, convicted in great part by the Weasel's testimony.
I think Tieri is not what Fradiano says he is, but since Fradiano got him convicted, he thereby becomes the most important guy.
You'll no doubt recall that Jimmy the Weasel put a well-manicured finger on Funzi Tieri at the trial, and then again on network television, calling Funzi the underworld's current Mr. Big.
Who would you say is the most powerful mafioso living today?
Well, I'd say Frank Tieri.
Do you think that the Weasel harmed you very much yesterday in his testimony? Beg pardon? You don't think so? Funzi Tieri's sentencing was originally scheduled for last Tuesday, then it was put over today. Well, tomorrow, in that courthouse, a new date is expected to be fixed. The delay of sentence stems from Funzi Tieri's lawyer, Jay Goldberg, being in a hospital with hepatitis, which he says he got from Tieri. I spoke with Goldberg today by phone, and he's bothered by all the publicity.
All the publicity that Jimmy the Weasel has been getting lately, will it have any effect on the judge who's going to sentence Funzi Tieri?
It has to have an effect. And it has an unwarranted effect because a lot of it stems from people of Fradiano's ilk. And I somehow feel that in America, people shouldn't be convicted on the word of people like Fradiano.
Funzi Tieri was convicted in November as a racketeer in charge of one of the 5 New York City Cosa Nostra families. Jimmy the Weasel, also known as Dr. Schwartz, is being protected under a government program which takes care of informers. Jimmy the Weasel admits to personally taking part in at least 5 underworld murders and posed in this photo with Frank Sinatra and the late notorious Carlo Gambino, who's right next to the Weasel.
You don't think he's a big wheel in the underworld?
I saw no evidence of it whatsoever.
Funzi Tieri is 76 and faces up to 20 years in the can. Some knowledgeable sources predict that as a result of his failing health and lengthy appeals, Funzi Tieri, who's out on bail, won't serve a day in jail. As for Jimmy the Weasel, also known as Dr. Schwartz, as I said earlier, he'll just lay low and continue to testify against other suspected underworld hoods. One more thing. Jimmy the Weasel does not like to be called Jimmy the Weasel. Got it? Roger?
Frank Funzi Tieri died in New York 2 days ago. Officials say Tieri was the head of organized crime and that he led the Genovese crime family, which has 600 members. Tieri was buried in Brooklyn today, and John Miller was there.
The passing of Frank Tieri struck a contrast to the life he had lived. His funeral was at a small church in Bensonhurst. It was a modest funeral for a man said to be a crime czar worth millions. It was a civilized way to go for a man whose name was so often connected with violence and bloodshed. It brought back memories to a reporter who has kept an eye on organized crime. One thought back to Brooklyn, 1979. Carmine Galenti, said to be the boss of all bosses, wiped out over lunch at an Italian restaurant's garden. The plot to kill Galenti had been mapped out by 2 crime bosses who, according to mob informants, had sought Tieri's advice. Tieri, they say, had some difficulty dealing with Galenti and gave the go-ahead for his murder. That would eventually lead to Tieri being seen as the new head of New York's 5 families. One also thought back to Philadelphia, March 1980. Then crime boss Angelo Bruno was blown away in a friend's car. Bruno had reportedly agreed with Tieri to split the action in Atlantic City. Bruno's partners in crime thought the deal was a little too generous to the New Yorkers, according to our sources, and so Bruno had to go. This man, known as Chicken Man Testa, took over. A year, almost to the day that these pictures were taken at Bruno's funeral, Testa was blown off his porch by a powerful bomb. And so Frank Tieri lived to see the end of the man who most believe cut him out of the action in Atlantic City. As one stood on 85th Street on this spring morning, Watching people weep over the fragile 77-year-old man who died here, one could look at some of the faces who did show. There were relatives and friends, some undercover cops, a lawyer, and some soldiers from the Genovese family sprinkled in the crowd, but none of the big men in the Genovese family and none of the bosses of other families. Only flowers spoke for many who were not there. Perhaps they didn't come to avoid the cameras, or perhaps they were just too busy keeping crime organized in New York. John Miller, Channel 5 News.